Too Much Information is a production of iHeart Radio. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Too Much Information, the show that brings you the little-known facts and secret histories behind your favorite movies, music, TV shows, and more. We are your teen idols of trivia, your Danny Zuko's of the deep dive, serving up facts and stories faster than grease lightning. My name's Jordan Runtagh.
And I'm Alex Heigl.
And today, folks, grease is the word. Yes, we're in the midst of our week paying tribute to my beloved Olivia Newton-John by exploring the making of her two most beloved movies. We're taking a look at the roller disco extravaganza Xanadu, a famous flop which has gone on to become a cult classic. Grease, on the other hand, was a success on pretty much every metric imaginable. For decades, it was the biggest movie musical of all time. Its soundtrack is one of the best-selling albums of all time. It's loved by multiple generations, and its popularity is showing no signs of diminishing. It was the apex of the 70s obsession with the 50s, which had become a sort of false memory in the popular consciousness, transformed from an actual time period into a mythic glory era, romanticized beyond all recognition by those who had survived the tumult of the 60s. It was a fantasy, plain and simple. There's the 50s as they existed, and the 50s as they're portrayed in things like Grease, Happy Days, and Back to the Future. And I personally was totally taken by the fantasy as a kid, and I've talked about this on this show many times. I love my mid-century Americana kitsch, and Grease is the gold standard of that. Heigl, what do you think of this movie?
I don't give a shit about Grease.
Really?
No, I mean it's I don't know. It's great on its own merits. I was thinking about this earlier. I don't really like the 50s.
That scans.
Yeah, I don't. I'm sorry. I don't really like rock and roll until it starts bastardizing the blues. And to me, all this stuff, like the whole 50s culture that comes from like the teen idols and like doo-wop and like rockabilly, just the least interesting era of it to me. Unless we're talking like really weird, like country shack rockabilly, like Hazel Adkins,
Wanda Jackson.
Yeah, that's kind of it. I don't know. I don't care. Nice, like it's nice jackets.
Okay. All right.
The cars were good.
Cars were great. Those fins.
Yeah.
Come on.
Yeah.
All right. I'll allow you that Grease is corny and tacky, but Grease is extra special to me because we did it as the spring musical at my high school, which allowed me to live out my 50s fantasies with all my friends. And that was such a great time. I was Vince Fontaine, naturally, and it was just the best. We would have dance parties in between rehearsals dressed up as a bunch of 50s kids. And yeah, I loved it. You know, rarely is one able to live out such a specific fantasy so perfectly, but I was able to. And I was a junior, and most of my friends were seniors, and they were all about to graduate right after the play. And so when we all sang, you know, we'll always be together at the end of the We Go Together song, everybody was like getting choked up. It was very sweet. So I always have a very special place in my heart for this show because of that personal moment for me. In a very funny way, I feel like I was a graduate of Rydell High School. So shout out to the Neshoba Drama Society 2005 edition. But even if you aren't a freak like me, I'm not surprised that people have such a soft spot for this movie. In addition to the great songs, it's a movie about firsts. First love, first heartbreak, first car. It's hard not to connect to it. Unless you're Alex Heigl. It's a lot of fun. Come on. And I can't wait to talk about it. I thought I was pumped for Austin Powers, but this might be my favorite episode yet, I have to say. Well, from the surprisingly gritty and raunchy stage play to the X-rated cartoon version of Grease we almost got, the musical number that indirectly killed Kenickie to the theme song that caused a standoff between the director and the head BG, the time we almost had Fonzie and Princess Leia as the leads, not to mention a porn star, to the time that Britney Spears filmed her most iconic video at Rydell High, plus all the hilariously homemade ways they tried to age down these 30-year-olds playing high schoolers, and also the hilariously tight pants that Olivia Newton-John got sewn into, here's everything you didn't know about Grease. The global phenomenon of Grease began as a theatrical production held in a Chicago trolley barn in 1971, which was supposed to only run for 4 nights. Can you believe that?
That must be an all-time ratio of planned production to shelf life.
Yeah, exactly. It was written by Jim Jacobs and Warren Casey, who were two guys who met in an amateur theater group in the late 60s, And both these guys were children of the 50s, and Jim Jacobs in particular embraced the whole leather-jacketed greaser subculture at his rough Chicago high school. These guys bonded over their love of doo-wop, which was definitely not cool in the late 60s. I mean, this was a period when the world was on fire. There was unrest due to the Vietnam conflict, civil rights upheaval, political assassinations, the generational divide.
This is when we insert our stock footage montage of people wading through the jungles with Fortunate Son or All Along the Watchtower.
Yeah. The carefree, relatively innocent world of the late 50s, which was just 10 years earlier, felt like a completely different world. Now music was supposed to be heavy, and distorted and laden with all kinds of meaning. Bob Dylan, the Beatles, Jefferson Airplane, all that stuff. This was miles away from Ramalama Ding Dong. And these guys, Jim Jacobs and Warren Casey, were really kind of tired of this. They wanted music that was fun. At parties, they'd grab guitars and do hopelessly passé songs like Teenager in Love by Dion and the Belmonts and reminisce about the world they grew up in that no longer existed. And it was from these late-night doo-wop sessions that Jacobs and Casey first came up with the idea for Grease. And speaking to the outlet The Buffalo News back in 2010, Jim Jacobs called it, quote, one of those pipe dreams you have when you're half in the bag at a party. We're sitting around in my apartment in like 1969 at some cast party of a show. Around 1 a.m, there were still a few old potheads laying around, passed out on the floor. I was sick and tired of listening to Led Zeppelin or whatever the hell I had on the record player, and I dug out some of my old 45. That was the humble beginnings of Grease. Dion and the Belmonts, Little Richard and the Five Satins. I said to Warren, man, wouldn't that be a gas to do a Broadway show using this kind of music instead of the traditional Brigadoon, Oklahoma stuff that we know? And the two had a bit of an argument about it. Apparently, Warren Casey said, you can't have nostalgia. That was only 10 years ago. But Jacobs made a point. Yeah, but in that 10 years, look what's happened, before naming all the points I did a minute ago. Vietnam, racial unrest, and the feminist movement, and generational divide, and all that.
Did that guy live to see BuzzFeed?
Yeah. It's just a really interesting sentiment to me because it makes you realize that cultural trends and shifts don't occur at a static rate over time, but in fits and starts. And there are some 8-year spans where it seems like culture was largely unchanged. I mean, I don't see a huge amount of difference between like 1981 and 1989, but if you look at clips of the Beatles coming off that plane in 1964 and all the short-haired kids screaming at them, and then you flash forward to 8 years later in 1972 with the changes in styles and values, it's really extreme. And, I don't think it's a stretch to say that we're living in a shift like that right now. I think this is a very different world than 2014, at least socially, with Me Too and Trump and the pandemic and Black Lives Matter movement. You do sort of see that. It comes and goes in these very concentrated periods of change. And I think we as a culture pick up on these shifts intuitively, even when the chronological time period isn't really that long. And it makes us nostalgic for, the quote unquote good old days, even when they were relatively recent. Some of this is generational. People grow up, they become adults, and then they mythologize the period when they were kids. And so because of that, you always have nostalgia movies and shows until the end of time. Happy Days, Wonder Years, Pen 15, all that stuff. But I think this phenomenon's intensified during periods of intense cultural shifts. And that's what's going on in the early 70s. After the tumult of the 60s, people look back at the 50s with rose-colored glasses, which, to a certain extent is pretty inaccurate because the 50s were no picnic either. I mean, you had kids in elementary schools thinking that the world was going to get blown away by the Russians and hiding under desks. So, I mean, it was, there was tension then too, but after the 60s, it all looked a lot easier, a lot more predictable. And this was the feeling that would inspire George Lucas to make American Graffiti in 1973, which was a fond look back at his youth in the early 60s, before JFK was killed and before long hairs invaded from Liverpool and the world just seemed safer and smaller. And American Graffiti opened the floodgates for a whole wave of 50s and early 60s nostalgia. Happy Days on TV, the Beach Boys going multi-platinum with a greatest hits album and selling out stadiums, and ultimately setting the groundwork for the film version of Grease to become a global phenomenon. And I recently did a little thought experiment where I did the math on the number of years between when a nostalgia movie was released and the year it was set. And then I converted that to 2022. So in this case, Grease was released in 1978, but it was set in 1959. So that's 19 years. So if Grease were made today, it would be set in 2003, which I'm kind of into. And I did this with a bunch of shows and movies and put it on Twitter, and it got a lot of really interesting reactions. And a lot of people were like, no, why did you do this? This ruined my day. Now I feel old, which was not my intention. But I just thought it was really interesting to put these time periods into contemporary context to see how they'd resonate with people today. Some of them did and some of them didn't. I mean, American Graffiti, which is sort of the big bang of boomer nostalgia in many ways, was released in 1973 and set in 1962. So today, American Graffiti would be set in 2011, which, kind of resonates with me. A time before a lot of the socio-political upheaval and general bad stuff like the pandemic that we've been going through recently. In a funny way, I do look back at 2011 with kind of rose-colored glasses. It seems almost quaint. It's a time when a certain segment of the population thought, naively, that things were getting better and would continue to get better. And that was not the case. But again, fits and starts. So, yeah, I just thought that was interesting. Anyway, this was the climate in which Jim Jacobs and his partner Warren Casey began writing their play Grease. And it was the first show that either of them had written, which, nice job. They wrote the book and the music, too, which is insane. And the title Grease was a riff on Hair, which was the Broadway show that was probably the most iconic Broadway show of the 60s. It billed itself as the American tribal love rock musical, and it just helped define the free love era. On stage nudity and songs like The Age of Aquarius. I mean, literally, a song from Hair is what gave the mythical 60s its name, the Age of Aquarius. And remember, your hairstyle in this era was a very potent cultural signifier, a declaration of rebellion, of independence from old, outdated social mores. So hair, there's a lot tied up in that. So the title Grease was a really clever hair-related reaction to that. Hair grease, grease for car grease and hot rod culture, and grease for greasy diner food. It's a clever title. There's a lot wrapped up in that one word. Jim Jacobs, again, considered himself a big part of the greaser culture when he was in high school, growing up in Chicago in the late 50s. So these guys wrote about their past and the kids that they knew back then. And again, Grease is set in 1959 in the fictional Rydell High School, named after the 50s teen idol Bobby Rydell. And the middle-class goody two-shoes character of Sandy, supposedly based on Jim Jacobs' classmate Donna Mills, who went on to become a TV star on the show Knots Landing, which is a spinoff of the primetime soap opera Dallas. I've actually never heard him talk about that, but she's claimed that she's the inspiration for Sandy, so... The plot of the stage production is extremely different from the movie we know and love. It's framed as a high school reunion in the then present day of the early 70s, and then the story is told as a flashback via Eugene, the school nerd. And the play is way more gritty and raunchy and vulgar than the movie. Again, the play took place on the mean streets of Chicago. The dialogue is absolutely laced with profanity. The greasers carry switchblades, which were turned into combs in the movie. And this is an incredible detail. I think Rizzo had a church key around her neck that she used to slash people.
Well, church key, for those of you who don't necessarily know, is it's like a beer bottle opener. It's not an actual church key, right?
Oh, really? Oh, I didn't see. I'm too naive for all this. I thought it was a literal church key.
That's what my parents actually always called it. Yeah.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah,
Rizzo sounds like a Catholic name to me, so yeah, it's like,
it's Rizzoli, right?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, that's disappointing, but the point stands. Much grittier than the movie.
I also just looked it up. There's a Chicago Reader article from 2011. It is a church key in the beer opening sense. Jim Jacobs talking about the Pink Ladies, apparently a real gang. Talks about them hiding razor blades in their hair, their teased hair.
Well, that was a classic thing that you would put razor blades in your jacket lapel. So when gangs would try to grab you and like lift you up by your shirt lapels, your leather jacket, it would slice their fingers, which is grotesque.
Yeah.
You know who told me that? Actually, Ringo Starr told me that when I was interviewing him. The gangs in Liverpool used to do that. And he was
that's wild.
So it's a good thing he can still drum, man.
Yeah, right. Good Lord.
Anyway, the play Grease opened on February 5th, 1971 at the Kingston Mines Theater Company, which was a disused trolley barn in Chicago. Talk about humble beginnings. Yeah, damn. And they planned for it to run for 4 nights, 2 weekend performances, but the unexpected reaction led to it continuing for 8 months. And this original cast featured an unknown Mary Lou Henner as one of the Pink Ladies, Marty. And that's funny to me because she would go on to star with Jeff Conaway, who played Kenickie in the series Taxi. And Grease made its way to Broadway a year later in 1972, where it was nominated for a Tony, and it ultimately ran for 8 years, breaking the record for the longest running show at the time. And it's funny, it was never a huge hit, but it had really low overhead, so they just kept it going. And the role of Danny Zuko was originated on Broadway by Barry Bostwick of the Rocky Horror Picture Show fame, and years later, the mayor on Spin City. And other replacement Broadway Dannys included Patrick Swayze, Peter Gallagher, the dad from the OC, Richard Gere, who was an understudy for a bunch of roles, but mainly Danny, Treat Williams, and Jeff Conaway, who would go on to play Kenickie in the movie version. Barry Pearl played Sonny in the musical before starring as Duty in the film version, and Jamie Donnelly played Jan, one of the Pink Ladies, both on stage and in the film. And the play also featured a very, very young John Travolta as an alternate for Duty, who was the young kid who desperately wants to be one of the T-Birds. Although I think in the play they're called the Burger Palace Boys instead of the T-Birds.
I love the tremendous violence and racial simmering under these, offset by the dumbest nicknames
Duty,
possible.
Putsy, Rizzo, Marty, Frenchie. Yeah. John Travolta auditioned when he was like 16 and he didn't get cast because he just was too wide-eyed and naive. And when they finally cast him, they gave him the role of this eager, try-hard Duty, the kid who really wants to be in the gang. And this is how the rest of the cast saw him. So when they went to film the movie version 4 or 5 years later, the cast and crew who'd been associated with the stage show really had a hard time seeing him as Danny, especially when Jeff Conaway was also in the cast and he'd been playing Danny for years and he had been demoted to, second banana Kenickie. So
second banana Kenickie. That was my nickname in college. It took 6 years to bring Grease from Broadway to the big screen, and it was many fits and starts. The film rights were sold 4 different times to 4 different people, and it just always ended up in development hell. There was an early version where Danny was supposed to kill himself at the end in a Romeo and Juliet style ending. Another version featured Danny working as a busboy and gas station attendant, singing a song called Gas Pump Jockey. That's hilarious. When they found Eddie Vedder, he was working as a gas station attendant.
Oh, yeah.
Famously. The weirdest version involves cult director Ralph Bakshi, who wanted to make it an X-rated cartoon, which is funny because, it goes back to how raunchy this original play was. Bakshi was famous for making Fritz the Cat, which was the first X-rated animated feature ever. That's an R. Crumb adaptation, right?
Yeah.
And he wanted to continue in those footsteps with Grease. And then that fell through. But the people who ultimately made the feature film decided to keep the opening credits as animation, as a nod to Bakshi. And that guy who did it, John Wilson and the studio Fine Arts Films, worked on Disney's Peter Pan and Lady and the Tramp.
Yeah, who would have thought?
The guy who really made Grease happen, though, was a producer named Alan Carr, who, if you're like Jordan or me or anyone who's read a lot about 70s entertainment, he looms large. He lived in this enormous Hollywood mansion, gilt-framed portraits of himself. He had a disco in his basement where he'd throw these massive parties and...
Oh, yeah, the parties were so huge that he called them Rolodex parties, where he'd host the A through L guest list one night, and then the next night he'd host the M through Z. It's just so people so he didn't have to cut down on his guest list. He just divided it over 2 nights.
Statistically, that feels lopsided to me, right? Because you're getting V through Z. There's probably fewer names with that, right?
Maybe.
We're taping this at 11:30 at night for Jordan, and these are the detours I take. And then, grossly, like Chuck Berry after him, at the end of his night, he'd retire to his bedroom and watch the sexual exploits unfold around his house with a CCTV system. I guess Chuck Berry was just watching people pee, though.
Yeah.
Which is worse. folks tweeted us. This house had been previously owned by Ingrid Bergman and was later bought by Brett Ratner. Wah, wah.
Who probably still uses the CCTV.
I was going to say, they just seamless transfer of power there. Alan Carr was an awkward kid who was ostracized for his homosexuality and then grew up addicted to glamour and power to make himself feel better. And
also addicted to drugs, we should say.
Yeah. Also, as was the fashion of the time. Did you see that video that was going around recently on Twitter of Ed McMahon and the closing credits of one of the Tonight Show segments, just pulling out his Coke spoon and doing a bump live on air?
Who is he with? He was with Carl Sagan, right?
Oh man,
I think it was Sagan.
Oh man, I love that. Carr buys the rights to Grease in 1976 for $200,000, and considering that this went on to make over $350 million, that is a good deal. That's a listicle. Initial investments versus returns. I know Halloween was a huge one. I think John Carpenter made like $10,000 to make that movie, and then it became the most profitable independent film of all time. Blair Witch is definitely up there. Anyway, Carr's plan was to, much like Xanadu, Carr's plan was to revive movie musicals in Hollywood. All these guys who just grew up watching all the MGM hits and got into power and wanted to remake them. Yeah, Sound of Music, My Fair Lady, all of this stuff MGM was just cranking out. And then the sort of death knell of that sort of era is like Hello Dolly and Godspell.
These big bloated musicals in the late 60s that just couldn't make their money back. And people, I think it was just musical fatigue too, because all throughout the mid 60s you had, again, back-to-back My Fair Lady, Sound of Music, sweeping the Oscars. I think the Sound of Music soundtrack is still one of the best-selling albums of all time. Definitely one of the best-selling albums of the decade. It's one of those things that you kind of like, you think of 60s music and you think about Sgt. Pepper, you think about Led Zeppelin 1, you think about all these rock and roll centric things, but if you actually look at the sales stats, what was selling back then were these very middle of the road musical soundtracks in gargantuan numbers that then the Grease soundtrack would then mimic 10 years later.
Yeah. What did we get before La La Land? What was the big one before pre-La La Land that would have revived? Oh, Moulin Rouge, you said, right?
Moulin Rouge. Well, I think Grease held the record for the best-selling live-action musical until 2012, the Les Mis adaptation with Anne Hathaway. So that was a big one too, although I don't really think of it as being that big, but I guess it had a big return.
But, you know, like you said, ebb and flow. Comes around by the middle of the decade, you see low budget cult stuff like Rocky Horror starts to bring that back. But when Grease was made, musicals were still seen as box office poison. Paramount only gave $6 million to this thing, which will buy you a couple canisters of Panavision. That's the craft services and cocaine budget for one day in 1976. Barry Diller, the studio head at the time, thought the whole thing was just ridiculous, and you know, God love him, that dictated the tone of the entire production. 5 weeks of pre-production, 2 months of shooting. Good Lord. There's a great Vanity Fair profile in 2018 by Michael Callahan called How Grease Beat the Odds and Became the Biggest Movie Musical of the 20th Century. It really lays out in stark fashion how much of a long shot this was. Quote, its leading lady was foreign and untried. A hell of a turn of a phrase. Its cast was too old, its score uneven, its choreography and staging more often than not thought up on the fly. Much like Xanadu. In an effort to broaden the film's appeal, the producers toned down the violence and sex and moved the setting from the mean streets of Chicago to sunny California. Unfortunately, the original writers of the play were not happy with this, worrying that it was getting too camp. Jim Jacobs, one of the co-creators, later said of the T-Birds, guys I grew up with would have beat those guys up in an instant. He is not wrong. He was also really upset about moving the setting to California because he felt that the crux of the story was about kids in industrial cities of the East Coast and the Midwest, as opposed to the sort of sun-drenched climes of California. Jacobs would call producer Alan Carr and beg, please don't make this beach blanket bingo. Maybe you want to punch in a quick sidebar about that later. That's one of your things, right? You kind of like that no?
This is 23 pages.
This did not this did not endear the original writers to Carr. They were shut out. They were not given any kind of supervisory role. And one day they showed up to the studio and found out their names were literally crossed from the security clearance list, and they were banned from the set. But other than laughing all the way to the bank, they did get a little revenge. Whenever the lines in the movie version weren't landing the way that they would, Travolta, because he had, been involved in the original version, would sub in lines from the musical. So part of them lives on in John Travolta's improvisation.
But Travolta very nearly didn't get the part of Danny. Initially, Alan Carr wanted probably the most obvious choice for a good-hearted greaser. He wanted Henry Winkler, who was in the midst of playing Fonzie on Happy Days, which is a very unoriginal choice, I feel like. But Winkler turned him down for fear of being typecast for the rest of his life, which kind of too late. He went on to say it was, quote, one of the great decisions of his life because Travolta was so right for the film, but he also regrets it a tiny bit because... why wouldn't you? Why would you not want to be Danny Zuko in Grease? So then thoughts turned to another contemporary titan of the small screen, John Travolta, who was then a big TV star thanks to his role as Vinnie Barbarino on Welcome Back, Kotter. Funny side note, I think I was talking to you about this the other night. When Quentin Tarantino was casting Travolta in Pulp Fiction, he invited Travolta over to his apartment to discuss the role. And Travolta showed up, and turns out Tarantino was unknowingly living in the exact same apartment where Travolta had lived when he first moved to LA and was getting his acting start, which I think is really cool. And Tarantino, because he's a giant weirdo, insisted that Travolta play a vintage Welcome Back, Kotter board game with him as part of his process while auditioning him for Pulp Fiction.
Jesus.
But this was during Travolta's wilderness years when he'd made a bunch of bombs in the 80s and kind of needed to get back on track. So he just kind of had to go with it, which is sad.
Yeah. Anyone being forced to put up with Quentin Tarantino.
Yeah. Anyway, more importantly than just being a TV star, John Travolta had appeared in the Broadway production as Duty, like we mentioned, so it seemed like a natural fit. And when the Grease shoot began, Travolta had just finished filming Saturday Night Fever, literally days before. And it wouldn't come out for a few more months, so he wasn't quite the world-beating superstar that we know and love. In fact, it was really rare at the time for TV stars to cross over into major film success. Audiences knew you either as on the small screen or the big screen. It was very rare that you could make that jump. But Travolta was under contract to a producer called Robert Stigwood. And not to get off on too much of a tangent, but Stigwood was this big impresario who was just like the octopus of the 70s entertainment industry. He had his tentacles everywhere. I think he managed Cream for a while. He managed the Bee Gees. He very nearly managed the Beatles. He produced stage shows like Hair and Jesus Christ Superstar. When he died, one obituary called him the most powerful tycoon in the entertainment industry. Not since Hollywood's golden days had so much power and wealth been concentrated in the hands of one mogul. So yeah, Robert Stigwood's a big deal. So if Alan Carr wants John Travolta, he's got to go through Robert Stigwood. So Carr brings Stigwood on board for Grease as a co-producer. And I love the fact that Stigwood has Travolta for a 3-picture deal. The first of which is Saturday Night Fever. Second is Grease. 2 of the biggest movie and music phenomenons of the 20th century. So this guy made his money back for sure.
Good for him.
Yeah. Travolta had very little experience as a leading man in a film, but he'd recently been in a made-for-TV movie called The Boy in the Plastic Bubble. Have you ever seen this or heard of this?
Is it the inspiration for Bubble Boy starring Jake Gyllenhaal?
Yeah. It's basically the same plot, but it's serious. John Travolta's this boy born without a functioning immune system, and he has to walk around in basically a spacesuit and live in a clean room. And it's about him trying to try as much as he can to engage with the world. It's supposed to be, I've never seen it, but it's supposed to be really sad. Apparently earned an Emmy and also inspired the Paul Simon song, The Boy in the Bubble. So yeah, quite a legacy there in addition to the Jake Gyllenhaal movie. Anyway, John Travolta had a good rapport with the director of that made-for-TV movie, a guy by the name of Randall Kleiser. So he suggested they bring him on to direct Grease, and at this point, whatever John Travolta wants, John Travolta gets. This guy gets to direct his first movie, his first actual proper theatrical movie. It's Grease. Damn. But it's funny, for his lack of experience on actually making movies, he'd worked as an extra on some famous movie musicals like Camelot and Hello, Dolly and Thoroughly Modern Millie, which he later said gave him sort of an insight into how to stage songs because he was there on the set watching them do it. And after getting the Grease gig, he had dinner with director Robert Wise, who's the guy who directed West Side Story, just basically in hopes of like getting some tips from him. And you can see the influence. Songs like Tonight, Tonight from West Side Story cut back and forth between Tony and Maria, similar to how Summer Nights cut back and forth between Danny and Sandy. But apparently Robert Wise freaked him out by asking how much prep time he had, and Randall Kleiser said, "Oh yeah, I got 5 weeks to prep for this." Robert Wise just gasped and said, you got to get out of this. You got to quit right away. Yeah, like musicals take years to prep, and he was just certain this was going to be a disaster. But thankfully Randall Kleiser didn't listen. Travolta also suggested they bring on Jeff Conaway as Kenickie, and as I mentioned earlier, Jeff Conaway had played Danny on Broadway for years, whereas Travolta was just this naive junior T-Bird, and this created a little bit of weirdness between them because, you know, for many years, this was very much Jeff's part. He was older, he'd done it longer, and now he was demoted, and his former underling was now the lead. So there was a little bit of a, you know, All About Eve situation going on there. A little bit. I mean, they were still friends, but it was weird. And we'll get into that later when we talk about the Grease Lightning scene. But yeah, they kind of had a little bit of a tough time. And another person close to John that he brought on for the Grease adventure was his sister Ellen, who played a waitress in the diner watching the dance competition on TV. She's the one who says, "Oh, there's Danny and Sandy." Yeah. Ellen Travolta later told the Spokesman Review in 2018 that she was just visiting the set one day and her brother asked her if she wanted to be in a movie. That's how loose it was. And she said she had no idea the kind of success it would become. "I get residuals every 13 weeks for 40 years. I only worked 1 or 2 days and I had a lot of fun."
Sandy, though, was a bit trickier to cast. They considered Susan Day from the Partridge Family, Marie Osmond of Donnie and Marie, who turned it down because she objected to the ending where Sandy transforms into a rebel, which tracks.
Yeah.
She told Fox News, "I was at a place in my life where I wanted to have children, and I didn't like the fact that the girl had to turn bad to get the guy. I think the guy has to work hard to get the girl. That's what I believe."
Fair. We'll touch on the movie's controversial ending later, but I she's not wrong.
So Randall Kleiser was roommates at USC with George Lucas, who was editing. He's USC, right? I'm not making that up.
Yeah.
Yeah, these guys were all part of the USC class. George Lucas was editing Star Wars around the time that Grease was being cast, having just come off American Graffiti. And he asked Lucas to take a look at some of the footage to see if Carrie Fisher might be a good fit. But the scenes that he saw of her were in the Millennium Falcon in the middle of a space dogfight, and just not enough to, you know, decide whether or not she was going to be able to anchor a 50s ballad in a dance movie. And ultimately, they did not pick her up.
Can you imagine? I mean, she would have owned the 70s if she was in Star Wars and Grease.
And finish it up with Blues Brothers.
Oh my God. Oh my God, you're right.
Her power would be unchecked. Randall Kleiser and producer Alan Carr then go to a dinner held at Helen Reddy's house. Helen Reddy, for those of you in the bar trivia circuit, is the Australian singer best known for "I Am Woman."
I Am Woman, Hear Me Roar. It's a killer song. Feminist anthem.
Carr was seated across from Olivia Newton-John, and by the end of the meal, as any one of us would be, he was smitten. He was completely certain that her, quote, goody two-shoes vibe made her the perfect fit for Sandy. Olivia took more convincing. She was a well-established singer. She'd gotten multiple Grammys by this point. She had hits like "I Honestly Love You," "Please Mr. Please," "Have You Never Been Mellow?" She was a big country hit at this point, which deeply annoyed the conservative Nashville community, seeing this
taking our jobs.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of what's the pejorative term for Australians. Anyway,
Aussie?
there's Aussie coming in and stealing trophies away from Dolly Parton and Tammy Wynette.
Yeah, the whole Nashville community really banded together and they started this group called, what was it called? ACE.
Americans for Country Entertainment or something?
Yeah, something like that. It was basically designed to exclude her, which is, I mean, I hate to think of Dolly Parton and Olivia Newton-John at odds. My two.
Oh, they must have. They must
did
have,
make up. They did make up eventually.
Because Dolly had a bunch of stuff to say, or she put out a statement when Olivia died.
Her special friend, I believe.
That's nice. She was a big deal in the music world, but not so much in film. She had only done 2 movies, both of which were before her singing breakthrough. The most recent one at this point was a campy British sci-fi movie called Too Morrow in 1970, which bombed. And apparently scared her off of acting, or nearly did, very nearly did. But John Travolta, again, as any of us would be, was just so taken with her. He didn't want anyone else in that part. He later said, "She had a brilliant voice, and I don't think there could be any more correct person for Sandy in the universe." But she was very nervous, both about acting in general, and especially trying to play against her type and assume the mantle of Leather Sandy at the end of the film. So she requested a screen test, which is odd because studios are usually the one who mandate an actress take a screen, or an actor or actress take a screen test, not the other way around. And she just wanted to see if she was any good and if she could be comfortable with John Travolta. He was reportedly very nice. Randall Kleiser said he knew she was a little nervous and wanted to protect her like a brother. They screen tested the scene at the drive-in and she liked how she looked. The only problem was that she couldn't quite get to grips with the American accent, also like in Xanadu. And so the producers agreed to change the script to make the character Australian. And with that all sorted, she got the gig, taking a reduced fee in exchange for star billing alongside Travolta. All that billing from this era is so damn funny to me. Isn't it Towering Inferno where Steve McQueen and Newman were fighting over who got billing? And so the famous compromise that they did was one is to the left of the title but lower, and the other one was on the right of the title but higher. So depending on whether you were reading it left to right or top to bottom, they were both on equal billing.
Yep.
Hollywood. As you meditate on that, we'll be right back with more Too Much Information after these messages.
Now it's time to state the obvious. Nearly all of these actors are way too old to be playing high schoolers. Vanity Fair reports that the movie cinematographer used soft lenses to turn back the clock for Olivia Newton-John, who was 29, and worried that she looked significantly older than Travolta, who was 23. And the director, Randall Kleiser, did a crow's feet test before casting to make sure that these people could pass as high school students as best they could. And Kelly Ward, who played Putsy, he was the youngest. He was 20, so he could almost pass. Jeff Conaway as Kanicki was 27. Didi Khan as Frenchie was 25, Jamie Donnelly, who played Jam, was 30, and Stockard Channing as Rizzo was 33. And she tells the story of Alan Carr, the producer, showing up on the set one day with a brown pencil, just dotting freckles on her nose to try to make her look younger. To which she said, "I don't look younger, I just look dirtier." And they also took an arts and craftsy approach to when it came to aging down Jamie Donnelly, who was again playing Jan. She started going prematurely gray, and they dyed her hair, but her roots started growing in quickly. And for some reason that I don't really understand, it was deemed unfeasible to dye it again. So several times during the shoot, they touched up her roots with black crayon, which I don't even know how that's possible. Maybe somebody meant Sharpie and it just got taken over the years as crayon, but I've seen crayon.
That or they were like melting it down and just painting her with melted wax.
Yeah, I think like Elvis used to like dye his sideburns like when they were really long in the early 70s.
Like shoe polish, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I don't know. Maybe it was that. But anyway, that's all weird. But now there's some more weirdness. There are some pretty amazing almost castings that went down in this movie, especially as far as the teachers were concerned. During an interview when Grease was still in very, very, very pre-production, producer Alan Carr talked about wanting Paul Lind as the principal of Rydell High School, the famous nasal voiced center square of Hollywood Squares, and not Uncle Albert, what's his name from Bewitched? And the dad from Bye Bye Birdie, too. That would have been amazing. But they also wanted Lily Tomlin as a home economics teacher, Alice Cooper as a gym teacher. And
I love that Alice Cooper was everywhere in the late 70s. They put him in Grease. They put him in Sgt. Pepper's. They're like, let's make this fucking weirdo who decapitates babies on stage into a major Hollywood star.
Mainstream, yeah. The mainstreamification of Alice Cooper. But my favorite is they wanted Andy Warhol to make a cameo as the art teacher in Grease, which is incredible. Yeah. And I guess Warhol was not asked because some studio executive had it out for him. They had some kind of grudge. And this executive said that he would not have, quote, that man anywhere near the picture, which I am dying to know more about. That's all I know. They were considering getting the Detroit Tigers player Mark the Bird Birdrich as the star jock in the movie. And they very nearly cast, to me, this is so insane to me. They very nearly cast President Gerald Ford's son, Stephen. Who's
what? Stephen Ford?
Yeah, Stephen Ford, the kid who was famous for blasting Led Zeppelin on the roof of the White House as a teen. They cast him as Sandy's airheaded jock boyfriend when she's trying to make Danny jealous.
Do you have other acting credits?
Well, funny you should mention this. He dropped out because of stage fright, which is hilarious because the part had no lines, but he took a small role in Contact. He was the guy who got picked to be in the spacecraft and then drops out because his kids don't want him to go. And it's just like a one-line part. But that's Gerald Ford's son. But this was like a year after Ford was out of office, too. So this would be, very weird.
Holy shit, he was in Starship Troopers and Armageddon.
I think Ronald Reagan's kid was...
he's been in a bunch of stuff.
Was an actor, too.
Wild.
But Ronald Reagan Jr., I think he hosted SNL once. But, I mean, Ronald Reagan was an actor, so I guess that's not as weird. Although Gerald Ford was a male model back in, like, the 30s. He was like an Abercrombie and Fitch model back when that was, like, sporting gear.
Jesus Christ.
Oh. Anyway, Stephen Ford, Gerald Ford's kid, dropped out of Grease, and instead they hired Lorenzo Lamas to play Sandy's airheaded jock boyfriend instead. Another great almost cast was for the part of Coach Calhoun. They wanted to get porn star Harry Reams, who was known for appearing in Deep Throat, which is easily the most notorious pornographic film in history thanks to his association with the Watergate scandal.
And all the damn money it made.
Yeah. Randall Kleiser defended his casting choice by saying it was the 70s, and at the time, it was sort of anything goes. The sexual revolution was happening, and porn stars were becoming somewhat accepted in media. I didn't think it would be a problem, but Paramount did. I guess they thought that they were going to lose money in the southern states if they cast a porn star, one of the most famous porn stars in the country at the time, as a lead in their teen high school musical. So instead, they went with Sid Caesar. And producer Alan Carr felt so guilty about giving Harry Reams the boot that he paid him $5,000 out of his own bank account as an apology, which I love. Grease is just chock full of 50s comedy legends and early TV stars. Sid Caesar's the most notable. He did the show, Your Show of Shows with Imogene Coca, which basically invented the TV sketch show format. And his writing room was just an incubator for an entire generation of comedians. You had Mel Brooks, Woody Allen, Carl Reiner, Neil Simon, who did The Odd Couple, among many other things. Larry Gelbart, who created MASH. These were his writing team. So... pretty amazing. Speaking of 50s TV superstars, the first choice to play Rizzo was Lucy Arnaz, who's Desi and Lucy's daughter. And she was dropped from consideration when her mother, Big Lucy, a.k.a. Lucille Ball, called Paramount and said, I used to own this studio. My daughter's not doing a screen test.
Incredible.
Which is incredible. It sounds terrifying. And it's true.
Yeah. She did used to own that studio.
She did. So they ultimately went with Stockard Channing, who'd acted with Lucy Arnaz in a recent play. So that's how they knew her. Kelly Ward, who played one of the T-Birds, Putsy, came to the auditions just to help out the choreographer, Patricia Birch, and ended up getting cast, just kind of fell into it. And Dee Dee Khan, who played Frenchie, hid under a studio security guard's desk to get a sneak peek beforehand at the script for her audition, which is amazing. And finally, there's the actor Michael Biehn. Is that how you say that?
Yeah, Bien, I don't know.
Biehn. He would later star in the Terminator and Aliens franchises. He's the guy that John Travolta punches in the basketball game when he tries to take the ball away from him.
God, he's handsome.
So's Travolta in this.
Yeah,
It must be said.
yeah. No, man, I love those Terminator movies so much, and Bien is just, he's a beautiful man in that first one. Anyway, wow, I'm discovering something about myself right now. Production on Grease began in the summer of 1977, and rather than a proper rehearsal or table read, the producers held a sock hop, hoping that the cast would get to know each other better in the time-honored tradition of dancing around in a circle wearing a skirt with a poodle on it. They spent the first few weeks working out the dance routines in an empty soundstage with Patricia Birch, who had worked on the Broadway show. Patricia Birch studied under Martha Graham and was one of the dancers in the original Broadway production of West Side Story. And she actually named all of the 20 backup dancers in this, whereas, mostly when you see the credits roll and the backup dancers are like...
Dancer number 6.
Dancer with eye patch. And she gave them all names like Sauce, Bubba, and Moose, and backstories so that they would have a better sense of their character.
Like a really elaborate backstory, though.
It's like I just watched The Conversation with Hackman, and it's like an early role for Harrison Ford, and he plays this sort of like fixer corporate executive type, and I was reading about it, and he decided of his own volition that the character would be gay, and like gave the character a whole backstory that was like not present anywhere in it. I was like, I just always think that's cute when actors are like that. Yeah, and it, that sense of camaraderie and deep character history did make everything feel more like a school. You have people with weird nicknames, and you have a sense of their past. And, there's a whole thing that happens in the background between two dancers who have a romance that sort of blossoms throughout the course of the movie, and they finally kiss during the background of You're the One That I Want.
There's a whole world going on in the background. There's a whole other movie being played in the background of Grease. I just think that's so cool. I need to rewatch it and like keep an eye out for these characters and try to watch. Yeah. Like the whole movie, it's like this like little blossoming romance. And then finally, when it's the shot when one of the T-Birds is doing the head in the hole thing during You're the One That I Want with the dog, and they're like in the background.
I'm just not thinking of this because I watched Community during the first stage of the pandemic and freshman year, and they do this bit where they say to the one character like, oh, you just have all of these little background adventures without the rest of us, right? And then in the back of the frame, in like every shot from this episode, you just see him like he like saves a woman with CPR, or like, no, I think he helps deliver a baby. Like he's just like in the background frame of all this. I wonder if that's a specific riff. I hope so.
It's like Truman Show level world building. I think it's so
cool. All from a bunch of dirty Chicago greasers, horned up, dirty Chicagoans.
So the cast were working out their choreography on this empty Paramount soundstage, and next door was Jack Nicholson, who had an office on the lot, and every so often he'd yell out the window to tell those pesky Grease kids to keep the racket down. And to make it up to him, just before shooting began, the production invited Jack Nicholson, some studio executives, and Warren Beatty, who was filming Heaven Can Wait, to just watch a run-through of the musical numbers, which they performed like a review, which I love.
That's another Xanadu tie-in.
Oh, yeah, you're right.
Because Heaven Can Wait is a remake of the film that Xanadu is a reboot of a sequel to.
Yeah, well said. Yeah.
Jesus Christ, that movie. You had something about a Mouseketeer in here, you weirdo?
Oh, yeah, that's right. It's a weird 50s throwback. The drummer for the rehearsal band was Cubby O'Brien, who was one of the original Mouseketeers. And you know who was also a Mouseketeer? Britney Spears. Yes,
Bam.
There's a Britney Spears connection to Grease. After these rehearsals were complete, the Grease production went to shoot on location at Venice High School, which is the same school where Britney Spears filmed the video for Hit Me Baby One More Time. which is incredible. Sadly, they mostly did exterior shots at Venice High School, so you can't actually see the hallway Britney danced through in Grease. That would have been amazing. To all intents and purposes, filming Grease was basically like going back to high school. Producer Alan Carr, who was not especially well liked in high school, later said making this movie was like being the president of the class in high school. It was a big party from the very first day until it ended. And
Is that what being president in high school is like?
This was all especially cool for Olivia Newton-John because she'd gone to a preppy Australian school with stuffy uniforms, and they even had separate entrances for boys and girls. So she would say, for me, this was breaking out and living the school experience that I never had. I don't know why I love this factoid so much, but according to the 40th anniversary special features for Grease, the cast chewed about 100,000 pieces of bubble gum during the shoot, which is equal to roughly 5,000 pieces a day. Which doesn't seem possible when I look at the cast.
Yeah,
we divide that by the IMDb. Yeah, I don't know. That's just, but it's I checked it with the official Grease website. Anyway,
good lord.
Yeah. Didi Khan said that they all stayed in character all day and called each other by their character names and sang a lot of 50s songs, even when the cameras weren't rolling. And this kind of backfired for the woman who played the annoying preppy girl Patty Simcox, who was a former Miss America finalist named Susan Buckner. And she apparently was ostracized by the cast on the set. And Didi Khan admitted as much. Didi Khan plays Frenchie. She said, we all made fun of her and ignored her. But Susan Buckner came out ahead because she had an on-set affair with Kenickie, which we'll talk about shortly. But director Randall Kleiser kept a really close eye on his cast when he wasn't shooting to incorporate their kind of real-life camaraderie into the film. And I love this so much. The cast of the Bad News Bears, the Little League movie, was, I guess, shooting nearby, and they challenged the cast of Grease to a baseball game with John Travolta acting as the team's pitcher.
Who won?
I have got to say Grease.
They just whipped ass. They beat those little kids.
Yeah, I was going to say, Bad News Bears is a kid's movie. Maybe it was the crew on the movie. I don't know.
Travolta hits a line drive, gives one of the kids gives Walter Matthau a black eye.
Yeah, I don't know. I want to know more. That's like the Eagles playing the staff at Rolling Stone in the 70s. Like the Eagles got so pissed at Rolling Stone for just ripping them in reviews that I don't know how this happened, but they challenged Jan Wenner and his staff to like a softball game. And the Eagles even had, this is when the Eagles were making stupid money and gagged out of their minds, and they had like uniforms made and everything.
Oh my God.
I think the Eagles won.
Compare that to Led Zeppelin, who John Bonham would have just fought everyone in that office barehanded and won. The Eagles ran. Don Henley's like, we'll play baseball. That'll teach you guys. I don't know if that's how Henley talks. He'll sue me just for saying that.
I was going to say. Want to cut that? So it was a really
onto a lighter
shoot.
Topic.
Well, yeah. It was a really fun shoot for most people, but not so fun for John Travolta. He was coping with the death of his girlfriend, the actress Diana Hyland, who'd starred with him in The Boy in the Plastic Bubble. And she died of cancer that spring, apparently dying in John Travolta's arms. And you would know it to look at him, but he was really struggling during the shoot. He couldn't sleep, and he'd call director Randall Kleiser at all hours of the night just to talk. And Travolta later said that doing Grease was, quote, a great distraction for me. It was probably the healthiest thing I could have done to be in back-to-back movies because I was very sad. I guess People magazine published a big cover story on her death, and someone made the mistake of leaving the issue on the set. It was the day they were shooting Grease Lightning, and Travolta happened to see it. And according to Kleiser, he just went completely ashen. Yeah, so Travolta was having a rough go of it. But that was more or less the solitary cloud during the whole production. Just everybody really got along great. During the sleepover scene at Frenchie's house, the actresses all hung out and painted each other's nails and had pillow fights. And that's the scene where the Pink Ladies mock Sandy, who, it must be said, is too pure to be pink, remember, by singing Look at Me, I'm Sandra Dee. And there's an interesting moment with that song. There's a line in the song where Rizzo in mock horror sings, Elvis, Elvis, let me be, keep that pelvis far from me. And that line was actually one of the few lines that was changed from the stage version, which had originally been "No, no, Sal Mineo, I would never stoop so low." But Sal Mineo, the 50s heartthrob from Rebel Without a Cause, had just been murdered in Los Angeles shortly before shooting, so they changed it to be about Elvis. And then the day they filmed the scene was August 16th, 1977, the day Elvis died. So apparently they heard the news just moments before shooting this scene, singing the song with references to Elvis. And Randall Kleiser said afterwards, it was all over the news, so everyone knew. We did this number, and everybody kind of looked at each other like, yeah, this is creepy. So that's weird.
Oof, boy.
Weirdly, that's not the only connection Elvis has to Grease. Producers initially considered him for the role of the teen idol who sings Beauty School Dropout to Frenchie, which I think would have been absolutely grotesque. Can you imagine 77 era Elvis looking like a tan sausage in an all white backdrop, crooning to Dee Con? Donny Osmond was also considered, the second Osmond reference in this episode. And Frankie Valli claimed that he was given a choice between playing the teen idol or singing the title song, and he opted for the title song, which that seems like a crock, but okay. The role eventually went to Frankie Avalon, who initially resisted it for fear of being typecast as a teen idol, which, again, it's like Fonzie not wanting to be Danny Zuko because he was worried about being typecast as a greaser. A little late. Weirdly, Frankie Avalon was persuaded to accept the part when producers described the scene. Apparently, an angel singing to a bunch of teenagers dressed in white mirrored a recurring dream that Avalon's cousin had told them about years before. And he took that as some kind of a sign that he had to do the movie.
What are you saying to me right now?
Frankie Avalon's cousin kept having a recurring dream about an angel singing to teenagers with a white background and told them about it years earlier. And so when they described the scene to Frankie, he was like, oh my God, this is some kind of a sign. Like, my cousin's been having this recurring dream for years. It's got to be fated or something. I have to do this movie. He's pushing 40 when he made this, but he still had swag, and Frenchie was smitten in real life. Dee Con later said there was no acting going on, which during her reaction shots where she's just staring at him, mouth agape and eyes aglow in a mix of lust and awe. And hilariously, the shoot was not fun for Frankie Avalon. He was absolutely terrified. He's really afraid of heights. And when he realized he had to descend the slippery 3-story staircase that had no railings on it, he wasn't happy and he nearly backed out in the middle of the shoot. He later recalled, I get really frightened and panicky with this. After the second take, I said to Randall, the director, you got to cut. I can't do this. And Randall, to try to chill Frankie out, put a bunch of mattresses on either side of the staircase just to calm him down. A dark aside about Beauty School Dropout. This was a song from the original Broadway show. The play's creators were inspired to write the song after learning about a woman who dropped out of beauty school to become a murderer.
Who among us? But enough about murder. This is a movie about young love. The film opens with Danny and Sandy kissing on the beach, which is an allusion to the famous scene in From Here to Eternity with Burt Lancaster. Danny's windbreaker is a nod to the famous red one worn by James Dean in the quintessential 50s teen movie Rebel Without a Cause. That was filmed at Leo Carrillo State Beach, which, as we mentioned on the Contact episode, that is the beach where Jodie Foster has her alien encounter with her late father, played by David Morse, at the end of the movie. Also used in That Thing You Do for the scene where the band film a beach party. Weekend at Party Pier with Captain Geach and the Shrimp Shack Shooters. How did I get that one out? Yeah, why haven't you been there yet?
Yeah, seriously. Yeah, I need to make a pilgrimage. All my favorite movies were filmed there.
This is their only kiss in the movie. And Olivia Newton-John admitted to being nervous for it because, new to the screen, love scenes were new to her. But, their relationship is weird because it suggested at the beginning of the movie that Danny and Rizzo used to date. Right?
Yeah. I remember one of the pink ladies goes up to Rizzo and goes, oh, you seen Zuko? Yeah, he's looking pretty good this year. It's like a lot of little allusions to the fact that they used to date. So I'm curious about how Danny feels that his best friend got his ex pregnant.
Well, Stockard Channing, who played Rizzo, says that Jeff Conaway was a real horn dog on the set. He even insisted on giving her the infamous Hickey from Kinnicky himself. During an appearance on Watch What Happens Live a few years back, Andy Cohen asked Stockard to name the horniest castmate on Grease. She said, no contest, Jeff Conaway. The trailer would be rocking at lunchtime. If this trailer's a rocking, don't come a knocking. According to the actress who played Patty Simcox, one-time Miss USA finalist Susan Buckner, she and Conaway had an affair, or as she calls it, a trailer moment. She said, we had to practice him pulling up my dress.
Which he does during the hand jive dance number, yeah.
She also spent years directing children's theater, staging annual productions of Grease at an elementary school, which means at some point she was reenacting her. Nope, we're not going there. Back to Jeff, that horn dog. He took an active interest in helping everyone else on this film also have sex.
That's nice.
And yeah, you got to give back to the little people. And this extended to trying to get a hooker for the guy who played Eugene the Nerd, played by veteran character actor Eddie Deason. Deason was a virgin and was terrified that he was going to show up to his trailer and find a hooker procured by Jeff Conaway.
I just love that the guy who played the nerd in the movie was driven to the set every day by the villain Craterface, the guy that they have the race with at the end of the movie. Picked him up every morning, drove him to shoot, which I find adorable. Nerds and bullies.
Samuel Beckett used to drive Andre the Giant to school in his cart.
I'm not falling for it this time.
That's real. That's not a setup to a joke. That's an actual real thing. Beckett was living in France and in Grenoble and used to take a then boulder-sized Andre the Giant to school in his Apple cart or whatever Samuel Beckett had at that point. Anyway, back to Kinnicky and Rizzo. There is a missing scene of Rizzo and Kinnicky having an argument, which explains why they're so tense during the diner scene when she throws a malt at him. That was cut because it was so vicious. One crew member described it as looking like something Martin Scorsese might have directed. Are you fact-checking me on Beckett and Andre the Giant?
Yeah.
I didn't make it up.
No, you didn't. Yeah.
Some of the stuff they did leave in is not exactly kid-friendly, though. There's a lot of innuendo in there, and that was on purpose. Director Randall Kleiser said, we wanted to put as many sexual innuendos as we could because that's what makes it fun. There's the hand... Well, yeah. Considering this would go on to be staged by every elementary, middle, and high school theater company in the country. But, hindsight. There's the hand jive. Kinnicky and Rizzo having sex in the back of the car and breaking the condom. There's Vince Fontaine trying to slip a drug into Marty's Coke. Rizzo saying, what is this, a gangbang? Which is, variously interpreted as a gang fight or the other thing.
I've never heard that used as a gang fight.
No.
I
was just trying to give you that one. So we can keep the PG rating. So iHeart doesn't come after us. Rizzo saying, what's up to Kinnicky, who responds, one guess. There's that line in Summer Loving. Did she put up a fight? Which, ooh. And then there's, Grease Lightning, which is about, doing the whole horizontal mambo in the backseat of a car. The line, the chicks will cream, and she's a real shaggin' wagon. I don't remember what we changed this to in my high school, but,
I think we did scream in my high school. This was I wasn't allowed to participate in this song because I couldn't dance. Like that was I could sing, but I couldn't, all the dance numbers, they just had me sit out because I was so hopeless. They had a crew of like 60 people on the stage, but I was so bad that I stuck out. So yeah, Grease Lightning I don't like very much because I have memories of screwing it up. But who else didn't have a good time doing it? John Travolta.
Well, I mean, there's that scene in there where he rubs plastic wrap on his crotch, which is, I guess, a nod to the long-standing, woefully ignorant days of birth control in this country when they said you could saran wrap your use it as a condom. I guess they made more of a deal out of it than the play, and then they were like, we'll cut it in the movie, and then bless him, Travolta did it anyway.
Yeah, overall, John Travolta really loved doing these musical numbers, and he later said, "Nobody can imagine how dynamic it feels to be in a musical. Imagine you're on the set. You have your choreography down. You have this music blasting, and then the director says action, and you just take off like a balloon in this other dimension. You just feel alive." This all sounds like Scientology text to me.
Take off like a balloon.
In this other dimension, you just feel alive. God bless that man. But when it came time to shoot Grease Lightning, he was a little out of sorts. And as I said earlier, this was the day that someone left the People magazine lying around with the cover story about Diana Hyland, his late girlfriend, and reading it just before taping this completely threw him off his game. And he apparently flubbed one of the lines. He couldn't get the line, "Go Grease Lightning, you're coasting through the heat lap trials." He kept singing heap lap. And no matter how many times he did it, he just couldn't get it. So the director just, was feeling bad for him, knowing what a rough day he was having. So he just let it go. Grease Lightning was originally supposed to be Jeff Conaway's big solo number. In the play, Kenickie had always been the one to sing it, which makes sense because it's his car. But then Travolta pulled kind of a diva move and snagged the song for himself. He says as much in the Vanity Fair piece for the 40th anniversary. He said, "I'm going to be completely honest with you. I wanted the number, and because I had clout, I could get the number." Hilariously, and I have no idea how this would work, in an early version of the script, producers wanted to get the Beach Boys to magically appear in the garage and sing the song, which is bizarre, but also kind of rules.
Yeah.
I mean, it sounds like 409. It sounds like one of the Beach Boys car songs. But yeah, this was, in addition to being a rough day for John Travolta, it was also a rough day for Jeff Conaway playing Kenickie. Again, he'd been demoted from Danny to Kenickie, and now his featured song had been taken away. And I even read somewhere that he had to walk slightly stooped over because he was a little taller than Travolta, but they wanted Danny Zuko to appear to be the alpha and be taller. So I don't know. That's unverified, but the sentiment's probably very real. And this is really sad. Jeff Conaway, again, Kenickie, was apparently completely in love with Olivia Newton-John in a way that seems to transcend his horn dog reputation. Like, he found it hard to speak in front of her. Like, he was so besotted. And later at the Greased cast party, he met Olivia's older sister, Rona Newton-John, whom he would marry a short time later, which then ended spectacularly in divorce, presumably because she's not her sister. That's not the worst thing that happened to Jeff as a result of Grease. While filming Grease Lightning, again, as I said, the song that should have been his, he was accidentally dropped by a cast member and injured his back. And this injury is believed to be what sparked his lifelong struggle with prescription painkillers. At least that's what he said. He talked about it during a 2008 appearance on VH1's Dr. Drew's Celebrity Rehab. And when he died in May 2011, his death was attributed to his long-term opiate use. So I think I just ruined Grease Lightning for everybody.
Well,
that's cool.
Wait until you get to the oppressively hot scene with the stench of pork in your nostrils.
Yes, a slightly happier dance number, the hand jive dance contest scene. I say slightly because it was apparently hot as hell and reeked of pork. This gym had no air conditioning, and they couldn't open the windows because there's a pork plant next door, and the smell of slaughtered swine kept wafting in. But temperatures in the gym apparently reached upwards of 116 degrees, which was oppressive enough to cause one of the T-Birds, Michael Tucci, who played Sonny Lettieri, to faint, and he was rushed to the ER. Yeah, this whole scene was
scent of pork still burned into his nostrils.
Yeah. This whole scene was a real bear to shoot. It apparently took 3 weeks of dance rehearsals and a full week to shoot. And Big shout out to retro rockers and Woodstock veteran Sha Na Na, who play the house band Johnny Casino and the Gamblers. In the original musical, Danny takes Rizzo to the dance, and Sandy stays at home and sings a song called It's Raining on Prom Night. But in the movie version, she comes to the dance, and she wasn't actually supposed to even dance in this scene at all. But once the choreographer, Pat Birch, saw that Olivia could, quote, put one leg in front of the other, she arranged a quick bit for her to do before Danny goes wild with Cha-Cha Di Gregorio, the best dancer at St. Bernadette's with the worst reputation. That's a great line. Watching the scene now, many people assume that the hand jive dances were sped up because it just is so frenetic, so frantic. But that was just the energy in the room. I had to sing hand jive when I was Vince Fontaine. Yeah.
Send us $5 and we'll do the pre-song rant.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember what it was. It was like,
don't give it away for free.
Oh, okay.
I like that you wrote John Travolta goes ham after we did this whole thing about it being next to a pork rendering plant.
Oh yeah, I should have actually used that. Damn. Yeah, Vince Fontaine spends most of the scene flirting with one of the Pink ladies, Marty Maraschino, who's played by Dinah Manoff, and she apparently was a terrible dancer, and despite many attempts to train her for the dance scenes, she just couldn't nail it, so she's always hidden behind people in all the dance scenes, just like me. We're going to take a quick break, but we'll be right back with more Too Much Information in just a moment.
Hand Jive was part of the original theatrical production, but 4 songs were written especially for the film. There was a solo spot for each of the leads, Travolta's Sandy and Olivia's Hopelessly Devoted to You, plus their duet at the end, You're the One That I Want, and the title track, Grease, written by Barry Gibb. Is that your favorite Bee Gee? More of an Andy's guy.
Well, Andy wasn't in the Bee Gees. He was like so much younger that he was kind of his own solo act. Morris and Robin had my birthday, so I think I should probably say them.
There you go.
December 22nd.
The contracts for Travolta and Olivia Newton-John specifically stated that they each needed a solo spot, and Sandy was written in about 15 minutes by the movie's musical director, a man by the name of Louis St. Louis. Hard to believe. Not a
so
member
nice. They named it twice.
Is that off the top of your head?
Yeah.
That was a good one. I guess he was like, songs with women's names were popular in this era, like Donnie by Richard Valens, Sherry by the Four Seasons, hence Sandy. You don't like this song?
No, I don't. It's a lame song. It's the one that he sings on a swing set at the drive-in after Sandy gets pissed at him for misbehaving in the car, in his sin wagon, as she says, and throws his ring back at him. Yeah,
I think we played with. Didn't we play with Sin Wagon at the Gutter a couple years ago?
I think you're right. We did. Wow. I never made that connection. That's a great band name.
Travolta wanted that to be the big heart-tugging moment when he's laying his soul bare, but the cartoon being projected behind him kind of undercuts that. Randall Kleiser got his hands on a bunch of old drive-in shorts, encouraging people to go to the concession. Let's all get a treat. And during the emotional climax of the song, in the movie screen projects a dancing hot dog jumping onto a bun, a different kind of climax.
Yes.
Travolta not happy about it.
Aww.
Olivia Newton-John's corresponding lament, Hopelessly Devoted to You, was added at the very last minute after the movie actually wrapped. Again, another Xanadu connection. I guess, folks, if you want to make your movie go well, add a bunch of to it after it's already wrapped. Production team will hate you, but you'll laugh all the way to the bank. Her contract stipulated that she needed a solo number somewhere in the film, but no one had any idea where. They didn't even have it scheduled on the shoot list, so they just kept kicking it down to the road, saying, this will be a problem for future us, until the chickens came home to roost. Finally, her longtime songwriter John Farrar was instructed to knock out a song that sounded like The End of the World by Skeeter Davis, so he went off and wrote a song in the same style and the same musical meter. Producers were not thrilled with it, but they also said that they didn't really care because it was added again after the fact, and it would go on to pick up an Oscar nomination. Randall Kleiser later said, "As we went into production, there was no song and no idea where we would put it. It wasn't even on the production schedule. Time was running out, and we had to figure out where to put the song and how to integrate it into the story. We came up with the idea of Sandy wandering around the backyard singing about Danny after the slumber party. A set was quickly built. It was one of the last things shot almost in one take." But probably the most troubled song in the entire film is the theme song sung by Frankie Valli of the aforementioned Four Seasons. "Grease is the word," although it's never actually said in the movie. The closest thing you get is the phrase "greased lightning." Wonder how this played overseas when grease translates close phonetically to grasa or fat. Places like Argentina, Mexico, across Latin America, other Spanish-speaking, Spanish derivative countries. The song was released as Vaselina.
No, not just the song. The whole movie was, you look at these Spanish-speaking countries' posters for the movie, it's just Vaselina with Olivia Newton-John and John Travolta.
Oh, that's so gross. Because isn't that the Pitbull song, or Daddy Yankee, the song Gasolina. Is about like,
I don't know what it's about.
Oh, I always heard. Nope, I'm not even going to say that. For the song Grease, Randall Kleiser had commissioned a 50s style song written by songwriters Charles Fox and Paul Williams. Paul Williams, head of ASCAP for very many years, right? Wrote Rainbow Connection.
Yeah.
Yeah, Paul Williams. Popped up on that Daft Punk album after 70 years of inactivity.
And more relevant to my interests, wrote hits for the Carpenters like We've Only Just Begun and Rainy Days and Mondays.
Fox had co-written the Grammy-winning Killing Me Softly with his song, I Got a Name, by my beloved Jim Croce. The opening fanfare to Monday Night Football.
That's a hell of a resume.
And a bunch of sitcoms. He wrote the theme song to Happy Days.
Ties. I mean, again, perfect choice to write the theme to Grease. I want to punch in. I never do this, and I hope I don't get in trouble legally, but I want to punch in the original Grease theme song that's been floating around the internet. It's really not good. Did I send this to you?
I don't think so.
Oh, wait, here. It would have been a significantly worse movie with this song, I think. It sounds like the Happy Days theme.
Yeah, it does. It's the doo-wop chord changes, right?
Yeah.
Grease is a feeling of pure independence.
It's terrible. Yeah, a little on the nose.
What does he say? Open your heart to the state of...
I have no idea. It's
Holy
awful.
That's it.
Yeah. It's really bad. But,
anyway.
Yeah, I mean, the director liked it because it sounded like a 50s song.
Right. And then co-producer Robert Stigwood says, well, I've got Barry f***ing Gibb. You insects. Who had just come off of Saturday Night Fever, and the opportunity was just too good to pass up. And according to a story which is probably shrouded in the mists of time and cocaine, Stigwood placed a call to Barry Gibb, who was apparently out on his boat off the coast of Miami at the time. What were you doing out there, Barry? Scooping up all the cocaine and pot that Jimmy Buffett was trafficking through the Keys? He said, Barry, I need a song for my movie Grease. And Barry was out on the water, and he said, what? Grease, like the country? Eh? And Stigwood responded, no. Grease the word. And the heavens parted and sun came through. And Barry later said, what the am I going to do with that? Hence, Grease is the word. It does, however, as you put in a semi-viral tweet, seem like Barry didn't really have much else to go on. But Randall Kleiser hated the song. He didn't like the fact that it sounded vaguely like disco, which would have been an anachronism in a film set in the 1950s. He also hated the lyrics, which he thought were too dark and cynical. And so the producer, Stigwood, tells Kleiser, well, go talk to Barry. Barry was in the middle of filming that Sgt. Pepper movie, which Stigwood was also producing. And so Randall Kleiser finds Barry dressed in his marching band outfit in gold chains, hair, beard, like a hirsute, cocaine-addled lion. And he says, Barry, this doesn't work for the movie I'm trying to make. This is a life of illusion, wrapped up in trouble, laced with confusion. What are we doing? This is not the movie we're making. We don't have any serious scenes in here. And Barry says, well, why don't you shoot a serious scene? And they left it as is because you didn't with the Bee Gees around this time.
No.
Man, what is it? Poor Barry Gibb masking his like suicidal darkness in like the most ebullient songs of this era.
Mm-hmm.
Guy's
got a darkness.
Yeah, sure does. Great head of hair though.
Yeah.
And Randall, first time director, didn't have the clout to push for changes. He also hated You're the One That I Want, which makes two of us, saying it sounded awful. I've just heard all these damn songs so many times. Also, which is the one that starts with I had to learn that bass part at one point.
I can see that being, yeah.
A number of other songs from the stage show were actually cut, though. One of those is called Those Magic Changes, which is a reference to the doo-wop progression, right?
Yeah.
Isn't he like sitting there strumming? He's like saying 1, 6, 3, 5 or whatever. Danny sings a few lines from that sarcastically at the dance. Sandy cuts him down, was saying, have you ever thought of singing professionally? Which is an in-joke because during the staged version, that was Travolta's song. Another song that was on the chopping block was Rizzo's solo number, There Are Worse Things I Could Do. Stockard Channing apparently begged Alan Carr to keep it in the movie. She says she told him, that's how you know what's inside this little person. Otherwise, she's just all that surface stuff. This is a great performance.
Oh, yeah. Watch her face during that. Like, she has so much happening in her eyes as she's singing that song. It's so good.
God love her, though. Stockard Channing doesn't give a
Yeah, no. Does not care about Grease.
She just doesn't come to the reunions. She got Tony and an Oscar nom, so she's figuring out too good for you, Rubes. People at Magazine asked her if she'd consider taking a role in the Broadway production. She said, are you mad? I've been otherwise engaged with my life, which is a diss for the ages.
That scene where Rizzo sings There Are Worse Things I Could Do was filmed at Venice High School, as we mentioned, where most of the exterior shots of this movie were filmed. The parking lot stuff at the beginning when they're all coming to school on the first day, summer nights on the bleachers, the auto shop, the track and field scenes. And the original idea was for the production team to just take over the school for the entire summer when classes weren't in session. But unfortunately, they ran afoul of the school's football coach, who made it known that they were not wanted there. And he would do things like put the sprinklers on the field when they were prepping for scenes and just generally harass the crew. So ultimately, they were chased out and went to two other schools. The interior classroom and hallway scenes, plus the dance contest in the gym, were filmed at a place called Huntington Park High School. And the big graduation day carnival finale was filmed at John Marshall High School in Los Feliz. There's a big banner covering up an M on the side of the school during the carnival. And this school has kind of a crazy history because it's cropped up in literally dozens of movies and TV shows and music videos. You'll definitely recognize it if you Google it, for its beautiful Gothic exterior, and the lack of palm trees out front make it so that it looks like it could be anywhere in the country. It doesn't look very LA-like at all. And it's most familiar to me as the exterior school shots on Boy Meets World, but it was also used in the 90s classic Can't Hardly Wait, which includes Jamie Donnelly, who plays Jan. She's a bit part as a teacher. It was in the video for Van Halen's Hot for Teacher. It was in Nightmare on Elm Street, Pretty in Pink, the Buffy the Vampire Slayer movie, Space Jam. I think they used the gym for that. And it was also provided establishing shots for the Wonder Years, iCarly, Masters of Sex, the A-Team, and young Sheldon. I don't know why I ended with that. But its connection to Grease runs even deeper than the carnival scene. The actress who played Cha-Cha Di Gregorio in the movie, the dancer that Danny dances with for the dance contest scene, Annette Cardozo was a graduate of the school. And following her death in 2011, the school planted a tree in her honor. I don't think Cha-Cha was present at her old high school for the carnival finale, but she was there for the climactic car race between Danny and Craterface, the guy with the car that shoots flames out the back. Unfortunately, she did not have a good time filming the car race scene. She was suffering an ectopic pregnancy and was in physical agony. And you can see in the scene, she's mostly leaning against the cars because she's in so much pain, she can hardly stand up. And shortly after the scene where they filmed the drag race, she was rushed to a local hospital for surgery. I think that same day. She was not the only person in pain while shooting the drag race scene. Director Randall Kleiser was working barefoot while filming the car race in the LA River, which is a bad idea because that water ain't clean. Yeah. He cut his foot and it became infected from some bacteria in the water. And by the next day, he was running a temperature of 102 and the production ground to a halt. And he later told the LA Times, "I couldn't get off my bed in my trailer." Before the medic arrived, Travolta entered to try a cure based on Scientology teachings. He sat down beside me and placed his index finger on my arm and said, "Feel my finger?" I replied, "Yes." He removed his finger an inch along my arm and asked the question again. I answered, and this process went on for about an hour. The next day, I'd recovered and I was back at work. Please don't sue us. There you go. Yeah, please take this offering. Oh. Yeah, the race between the T-Birds and the Scorpions was originally supposed to take place on the high school track surrounding the football field, where they were going to have massive gladiator-style floats that were going to be parked for a parade in the movie, kind of like the parade scene in Animal House. And it was supposed to be this big parody of the chariot race scene in Ben-Hur, but then the bean counters basically said, "How are we going to pay for all this?" So they scaled it all back because of the relatively micro budget of the movie. And the last remaining trace of this idea is when Craterface's hubcaps have the kind of like knives on the end and they slice through John Travolta's car, Greased Lightning.
Yeah, like Ben-Hur.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Speaking of the drag race victory, that is for some reason the catalyst that compels Sandy to give herself her radical makeover. Change herself completely in order to be seen as worthy of a guy who wins races. You're an original Sandy. You're not a new Sandy guy.
Yeah, no, I mean that probably reveals more about my own inner psyche than I care to reveal on this show.
I gotta say, I think you're in the minority for that one.
Yeah, I know. No, I thought that original. I think Olivia Newton-John referred to them as Good Sandy and Bad Sandy, and I liked Good Sandy. I did.
Well, again, you're wrong because the casting crew were extremely into the Bad Sandy look. Olivia Newton-John came up with the makeup and hair herself, and when she came onto the set to show Randall Kleiser, the crew just flocked around her, whistling and catcalling her because men are disgusting.
They didn't even know it was her, apparently.
He didn't recognize her. Yeah, they just all started. He said they swarmed like wolves. Oh, I laughed to keep from crying. Yeah, she said she enjoyed this sort of reinvention of the character because it allowed her to kind of act out of her, usual role. She said later, "That was such a stretch and something I was really worried about. But when it happened, it was just this amazing feeling. It was very freeing, not just for Sandy, but for me as well, because I was always the girl next door. And then I got into that trailer with those guys and they put me into that outfit and the hair and I walked out to show Randall and the whole crew turned around. And the look on their faces." She says, "I remember thinking, oh my, I've been doing this all wrong." Travolta, with his inimitable way with words, said, "I thought it was the bomb. She was like Marilyn Monroe mixed with some motorcycle chick." Jesus Christ, John. The mix of that, I knew, was going to be outrageous. In the play, it was a laugh. In the movie, it was like, wow. The famous story about those skin-tight pants was that they were vintage from the 1950s and the zipper was broken, so Olivia Newton-John had to be sewn into them the morning of the shoot. Of course, her first thought was, well, what if I have to pee? And she didn't want to slow down production with a bathroom break, so she avoided drinking water for the entire day, which, not a smart move. It was 102 degrees out, and everything, as we've discussed, smelled of pork.
Oh, different school. But
That's canon now.
it was
The
still
entirety,
all over all the clothes and everything. Yeah, you're right.
yeah, the entirety of the grease shoot smelled of pork. Pork grease, if you will.
Yeah, there you go.
If you'd like to tweet us about this episode, please do so using the hashtag #ItSmeltOfPork. Olivia actually owned those pants for years, but understandably never wore them again. Then in 2019, she auctioned off her outfit to raise money for her cancer research charity. They were bought by the founder of Spanx
I love
for
that.
$405,700. And they are on display at the Spanx headquarters. Sure. The leather jacket was bought by an anonymous bidder who later returned it to her, which is just adorable.
Yeah.
The funniest part of all this is that the cast and crew showed up on the field to film that number, the one that I won, without having rehearsed any kind of dance. And this was a new song for the movie, so it didn't have any history with the musical. In an interview with Vanity Fair, the director, Randall, says that they had just been handed this newly recorded song that day. And he and Pat Birch whipped up choreography in about 20 minutes. They were scrambling to do that scene. They hadn't even seen the carnival stuff. They just made it up on the spot. The actor Kelly Ward, who played Putsy, told Yahoo in 2018, it was lightning fast work and no one was really quite sure how it would play because it's such a different kind of music than the rest of the score.
Yeah.
And nonetheless, everyone threw themselves into it.
It
20 minutes.
Yeah, that's insane. It's also, he's right. It's a very different kind of song. Like, it's not a doo-wop-y song. It's like, it's a 70s country and western song, sort of. Like pop song, country western pop song. Yeah, this whole scene is nuts. They only had a day to shoot, which is not a lot of time for such a complicated sequence. And you can see in the reaction shot when Danny sees Sandy for the first time, the background behind him is dark because the sun is setting. Like, it was just a long day. And hilariously, one of the things that took a long time to shoot was the moment when Sandy takes the cigarette out of her mouth and drops it at her feet in front of Danny, who's on the ground worshiping her. The cigarette kept bouncing. And the prop guy finally said, put a bobby pin in there and it'll land and it'll stay there. So they burned God knows how many minutes trying to get that to happen. All in all, they had to do everything very, very fast. They had to do the close-ups in the Shake Shack, you know, that like like funhousey thing. They had to do that on a sound stage because they wanted to go do some reshoots, and the carnival had already moved on.
Carnies, dude.
Yeah.
They don't like staying in one place.
Oh my God. Weirdly, not one, but two incredibly famous directors visited the set that day, which must have been terrifying for Randall Kleiser, a first-time movie director. George Cukor and John Schlesinger were on the set the day they filmed the We Go Together song number. I don't know how or why that happened. George Cukor has directed some of the best movie musicals of all time. He did My Fair Lady and the Judy Garland version of A Star Is Born. John Schlesinger, what all he do? Did he do Midnight Cowboy? That's the only... Marathon Man, too. Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, so,
Was it safe?
So to honor these two titans, Randall Kleiser ran the whole We Go Together number just for them. We're sitting on the bleachers, watching. No cameras rolling, no nothing, just for these two guys, which must have made him extremely popular with the cast and crew, considering it was 102 degrees out and they had no time. But the dancers all did the number, flips head over heels, lands right at George Cukor's feet, king of movie musicals the decade before. Cukor just looks over at the director, Russell Kleiser, and said, very spirited. Which I can't tell if that's shade or just understatement. Anyway, this brings us to the controversy surrounding the end of Grease, because let's be real, It's a truly terrible message. Change to please the one you love. There's really no way to get around it.
Yeah.
Not to get all pearl clutching, but the smoking element is also really troubling considering how many kids love this movie. Grease co-creator Jim Jacobs has said that this ending was actually meant to spoof 50s teen movies where the rebel always gives up his bad boy ways at the end of the movie and begins a new life on the straight and narrow. And in this case, he thought it would be funny if instead of the bad boy repenting, the good girl, in quotes, would go bad. And it was just a funny way to play with the audience's expectations. But the joke was a lot more obvious in such an obviously satirical play, which is a very different vibe than the movie. And the writers of the play have said that the "Look at Me, I'm Sandra D" song was meant to suggest a class conflict between Rizzo and Sandy. And the writers of the play themselves were more biased towards the Greasers. In the song "Look at Me, I'm Sandra D" was meant to satirize middle-class phoniness and shallowness. So when Sandy, quote, conforms to the Greasers at the end of the play, they felt that she'd broken free of this phony middle-class value system, and that was something to celebrate. It was actually a happy ending. She was free. This all rings a little different in the movie, where, the little bit where she sings Goodbye, Sandra D, right after the drag race. It has some sadness to it, as far as I was concerned. It's like saying goodbye to a part of herself. It's kind of troubling to hear. And I guess I'm not alone in feeling that. After the BBC aired Grease in December of 2020, they got inundated with angry letters and messages on social media claiming that Grease promoted misogyny, racism, and homophobia. And soon after, Olivia Newton-John defended the movie during an episode of an Australian podcast called A Life of Greatness, saying, "Those who criticize Grease need to relax a little bit," and she called the comments kind of silly before adding, "The movie was made in the 70s about the 50s. It's a fun movie musical, not to be taken so seriously. I think everyone is taking everything so seriously. We need to relax a little bit and just enjoy things for what they are." And she added that she doesn't view Grease in the way that her critics do, and that it's, quote, "just a fun movie that entertains people, that's all." Both of those are true. It could still be a terrible message that people still take way too seriously.
Yeah. I mean, welcome to the internet.
Yeah, true. Yeah.
Speaking of the internet, proto-internet conspiracy theories, the film ends with a shot of Danny and Sandy driving Grease Lightning alongside an assembled crowd of all of their friends before the car flies into the sky.
For no reason.
This scene has given rise to a theory that spread through Reddit in 2016, thanks to, weirdly enough, a co-sign by Sarah Michelle Gellar. As with a lot of Reddit theories, it is deeply bizarre and very dark. The theory goes that Sandy actually drowned on the beach at the beginning of the movie, hence the line, "saved her life, she nearly drowned," the line that Danny sings, and the entire movie is her, quote, coma fantasy. I think also a band we played with at Gutter a few years back. The final flyaway scene in the movie is her ascending to heaven, courtesy of the cute angel she met on the beach. Randall Kleiser has insisted that there was no deeper meaning. It's just a fun ending, and said that he would address the theory further in upcoming memoir, which sounds more like a plug. Olivia Newton-John actually commented on this during an appearance on the Today Show, saying, "I thought, that means we were the first zombie movie ever, and we looked pretty good for zombies. Don't you reckon?"
I love her so much.
Great soundbite.
Yeah.
Not the first zombie movie ever, though, Olivia. It's Night of the Living Dead. Please get serious. The movie does end with Sandy waving to the camera, but that wasn't supposed to be the final ending. There was actually supposed to be a final scene of Danny and Sandy having a kiss before the credits roll, but it is missing and currently lost. Cut by mistake during editing and lost before theatrical release. Reshoots were deemed too expensive, and so the production team just rolled with what they had. A low-quality black and white version of this shot does exist and can be seen on YouTube if you are a completist, like my esteemed co-host. Randall Kleiser has repeatedly tried to colorize it over the years and include it on various releases, but so far he's been unhappy with the results. He is hoping that the technology will improve in time for the film's 50th anniversary in 2028, and so he can reinstate the intended ending. Sounds like a long time to wait for just a shot of someone for just a kiss.
The lost kiss.
No, there's something poetic about that. Long time to wait for a kiss. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Not the only post-production snafu the filmmakers had on their hands. There are a lot of obvious censor blurs in the scenes at the Frosty Palace diner. That is to get rid of Coca-Cola ads. One version you've heard of this is that they had a product placement deal with Coke, and then that fell through and they went with Pepsi.
Yeah, and you can see a Pepsi logo in the animated opening of the movie.
Yeah. Then when they were cutting it, the producers realized that Pepsi would not be happy to see significantly more ads for Coke in the movie. And once again, as is becoming a theme with this movie, deemed too expensive to reshoot. So they just really blurred it out.
Overall, aside from this whole Coke Pepsi snafu, Paramount were pretty hands-off when it came to this movie. They just thought it was a little teen musical with limited appeal, so they didn't find it worth their time to really give notes. And the first time any executives saw it was during a screening in New York, and a bunch of the top brass balked. They declared it unreleasable. I guess they decided to let it out. I don't really know what changed, but they apparently put the kibosh on plans for an immediate sequel. And remember the scene at the end of the movie at the carnival where the T-Birds are throwing pies at the coach and he says, "I'll see you in summer school"? According to Didi Khan, who played Frenchie, there was supposed to be an immediate sequel called Summer School. And she told Huffington Post, John Travolta wanted to do it, Olivia wanted to do it, everybody wanted to do it, but Paramount was looking at the dailies and said, "Oh, it's a cute movie, but it's not going anywhere." And so they passed. But at least the cast were having a good time. Apparently, no one remembers the wrap party very well because someone made extra strong pot brownies, which is a very un-70s disco era type thing to have at your party, I guess. But the guys playing the T-Birds handed out buttons of themselves mooning the camera. That's classic. That's fun, yeah. The film premiered on June 4th, 1978 at Grauman's Chinese Theater in Los Angeles, and John and Olivia pulled up in an old convertible, just like the end of Grease, really, with John in his T-Bird leather jacket and Olivia in her white prom dress as Sandy number 1. And then after the movie, she did a quick outfit change and exited the theater as Sandy number 2 in a pink spandex outfit. And the streets were predictably a mob scene, predicting the gargantuan success that was to come. Alan Carr threw his own release party at Studio 54 in New York a few weeks later, and it was a typical big budget themed studio party. The entranceway to the club was all lined with lockers, and the dance floor, I love this, had a bunch of big finned 50s cars on loan from a local museum. And the only problem was, just before the doors opened for the party, the fire marshal reminded them that they needed to empty the gas out of the tanks for fire code reasons. So each vehicle had to be taken out onto the street where its tank was emptied, I guess just into like the sewer, and then they pushed them back inside by hand. And the party went off without a hitch, except for a minor incident where some partiers climbed into a 1950s Chevy convertible and set fire to the seats. I blame Jeff Conaway.
Rightly so.
Yes.
This movie instantly out of the gate became a phenomenon. Made $366 million on a $6 million budget, making it obviously the highest grossing film of 1978, the highest grossing live action musical of all time, beating out a then 13-year-old record set by The Sound of Music. Grease held that, as you mentioned earlier, Grease held that title until Les Mis in 2012. Director Sweet Boy Randall Kleiser was so new to this that when the studio called him to tell them how crazy the first weekend money on this film was, he said, "Is that good?" It was so popular during this its release that some theaters were playing it literally back to back to meet demand, but they couldn't even turn over the audience, get them in and out of the theater fast enough, so that by the time the last viewers took their seats, the movie had already started and was part of the way through. And this worked out in their favor because you couldn't see an entire screening of the movie because you were being shoved in like Japanese subway passengers, and you had to see it multiple times to finally get the whole thing. The soundtrack launched 4 singles to Billboard Top 10, sold 13 million copies in its first year alone, making it the second best-selling album of the year behind the soundtrack for Saturday Night Fever, which also starred Travolta. And it has gone on to become one of the top-selling soundtracks ever. 28 million copies sold. And Hopelessly Devoted to You scooped up an Oscar nom. All that said, reviews were not great. Grease was savaged in a lot of prominent outlets. The New York Daily News said the film should really be covered on the obituary page. A good one. that it had been made, quote, by nitwits who haven't the faintest idea what a camera is, and that its music was atrocious, and that Olivia Newton-John sounds like a tone-deaf cow and makes a screen debut that has all of the charisma of rancid buttermilk. Ugh.
Wow.
Today Show critic Gene Shalit called it visual junk food, which, fair. Time magazine said director Randall Kleiser doesn't seem to know what he's talking about. Charles Champlin, writing in the LA Times, said, I didn't see Grease on stage, but on the testimony of this strident, cluttered, uninvolving, and unattractive movie, it is the 50s, maybe the last innocent decade allowed to us, played back through a grotesquely distorting 70s consciousness. Washington Post critic Gary Arnold said, I've never seen an uglier large-scale musical. Wait till Xanadu, buddy. And finally, Pauline Kael, queen of movie reviews in this era, dismissed the movie with a single word, Klutzburger. So we have Klutzburger versus Xanadu for the pithiest pans of this late 70s. Jordan, take us out. Talk us about Grease 2.
Yes, if critics hated Grease, then they really hated the sequel, 1982's Grease 2, starring Michelle Pfeiffer and some other guy Alan Carr cast after seeing him appear nude as a hustler in an off-Broadway play. The movie basically flipped the premise of Grease on its head. A biker girl meets a preppy boy. All in all, Paramount really whiffed it by not doing that sequel, the summer school thing, as they originally proposed, because that would have been awesome. It was supposed to follow Kaniki and Rizzo and watch their relationship progress. But yeah, I went with Grease 2, and it has its defenders, but I've never seen it all the way through. I didn't like what I did see. I know a lot of people didn't like it, and it didn't do particularly well. And producer Alan Carr, who was really the one responsible for making the whole Grease phenomenon happen, he sort of flamed out after the success of Grease. The next thing he did was 1980's Can't Stop the Music, which was a splashy musical extravaganza that, along with Xanadu, helped inspire the creation of the Golden Raspberry Awards, or the Razzies, for the worst film of the year. And in 1989, he produced an overblown opening segment for the Oscars, which is so insanely tacky and coked out that it defies description. Check it out. Rob Lowe duets with a woman dressed as Snow White on Proud Mary for some reason. It's pretty out there. It's widely accepted as the worst moment in Oscars history. After that, Alan Carr spent several years living as a recluse in his Hollywood mansion. Vanity Fair described him as Norma Desmond with donuts, which, ouch, but not inaccurate.
Yeah.
He attempted a comeback, but died of liver cancer in 1999 at age 62, taking with him any chance of a Grease 3, which most of the original cast had tentatively agreed to do. They wanted to maybe set it in the 70s and, I don't know, have their kids involved or something. Yeah, but after Alan Carr died, that kind of went out the window. David Geffen, another similarly huge 70s music mogul, later told Alan Carr's biographer, Grease was the best thing that happened to Alan, and it was also the worst thing. And yeah, it kind of sums it up. There was a live television production of Grease that aired in 2016 with Carly Rae Jepsen being the only person that I can be bothered to recall from it. Everyone else, I think Julianne Hough, it looked terrible. I tried to revisit it before taping this, and then I just looking at the graphics for it, and I turned it off. Yeah, it was bad. But the only person to appear in Grease 1, Grease 2, and the live TV version is our beloved Didi Khan, who played Frenchie, so God bless her. However, there is a Grease prequel announced in 2019 called Summer Lovin', with scriptwriter John August, who did Big Fish. That's a good movie. Charlie's Angels, less good. A bunch of Tim Burton stuff. Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, bad. Corpse Bride, meh. Frankenweenie, Will it be good? Heigl, what do you think?
I mean, it's announced in 2019.
Yeah,
so,
who knows what?
Yeah, I guess we got to give them the grace period from COVID, but I mean, has it even been, did they even get a script out, do you think?
I don't know.
I wonder if you know what I would actually prefer is if it was like a gritty reboot.
If it was like the original play, yeah.
Like a lone
in Chicago.
Like a lone bass register piano key banging out the ostinato, and they're like, Danny was always a little bit different. You know, like a Joker version.
Brings
of
a whole
Grease.
new meaning to did she put up a fight?
Oh,
Well, we've been talking about this movie for the last 6 hours.
Jordan is in a fever dream.
Yeah, it's now past 1 a.m. my time. We should probably let everyone get back to their lives. Do you have anything else to add, Heigl?
I got nothing. I'm happy to take this journey with you.
Thank you.
And yeah, man, I was going to say something about the smell of pork. I think I already beat that one into the ground earlier.
Well, thank you for indulging me, and that goes to the rest of you listeners as well. We truly go together like Rama Lama Lama Kadinga da Ding da Dong. Something like that.
Do you smell toast? Or you? Folks, thank you for listening. This has been Too Much Information. I'm Alex Heigl.
My name is Jordan Runtagh, and I feel it's only right to end off on a bit of doo-wop. I'm not sure if we're allowed to, but let them sue. For the ride out tonight, we're going to play you a new old favorite of mine, taking it back to the year of our Lord, 1957. It's the Five Royales, and this one's dedicated to the one I love. That means all of you.
Those guys are all dead. They're not suing us.
Good night, everybody.
This is dedicated to the one I love. While I'm away from you.
Too Much Information was a production of iHeartRadio.
The show's executive producers are Noel Brown and Jordan Runtagh.
The supervising producer is Mike Johns,
The show was researched, written, and hosted by Jordan Runtagh and Alex Heigl.
with original music by Seth Applebaum and the Ghost Funk Orchestra. If you like what you heard, please subscribe and leave us a review. For more podcasts on iHeartRadio, visit the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to your favorite shows.